As we approach the end of Black History Month, I'm so happy to have our guests joining us today for the second in this series, The Voices of Lyme, the Intersecting Identities of Black People who are Disabled. We thought this conversation was so important, we've opened it up to the public. So there may be some of you who are joining us who are not as familiar with Lyme Connect. So I'm just going to take one moment to share a little bit more about us. At Lyme Connect, we are a not-for-profit organization, and our mission is to rebrand disability through achievement. We do that by attracting, preparing, and connecting high-potential professionals and university students, including veterans, who have all types of disabilities for scholarships, leadership programs, internships, and full-time careers with the world's leading corporations, our partners. And I know we have many partners joining us today, including our two guest speakers today. In turn, we support our corporate partners in recruiting, onboarding, developing, retaining, and promoting all employees who have disabilities. So if you're joining us and you're a person with a disability and you have not joined our network yet, we encourage you to do that. And I know that information will be put into the chat. And if you are not a person with a disability, but you'd like to keep up to date and learn more about Lyme Connect and all that we have going on, I encourage you to join as a friend of Lyme. So with that, I'm so thrilled to have our two guest speakers here with us today. And I'd like to invite Alfred Woodward, who is involved with diversity recruiting at Goldman Sachs and who is also our moderator for our Black community group at Lyme Connect, and Taylor Brown, who is a senior business consultant at EY, also one of our partners. And I'm so excited for this conversation today and thrilled to turn it over to both of you. So welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Renee. Just want to give a quick shout out. Thank you so much to Lyme Connect for being able to host events like these. Coming to the end of Black History Month, it's always important to be able to celebrate Black culture, and that includes all of their intersections. And so really, really happy to be able to have this conversation with Taylor today and kind of like talk through some important topics. But before we get into that, I think it would be good just kind of like just to give a quick introductions of ourselves. As Renee mentioned, I'm Alfred Woodward. I'm an associate at Goldman Sachs. I work in human capital management. I manage our disability network. I am the ATM advisor for the Americas Network. I also serve as a program manager for one of our recruiting initiatives called the Neurodiversity Hiring Initiative on the recruiting side. Definitely keen on this group of students, of professionals, and happy to be here. Just by, just experience, I would say that, from myself, I always talk about this, and I had a mental health awakening back in 2019, which really kind of like put, the realm of disability to the forefront of my experience. And I think that is something that it was significant for me. I always give credit to Lyme for helping me find my voice in that experience. And so happy to have this conversation with Taylor, and I'll let her introduce herself as well. But it's going to be just for warning, it's going to be pretty casual. We're going to be talking. You all are sitting in on a catch up of sorts. So really interested to learn more about Taylor and also be able to bring some of these points to the group. And so Taylor, I'll go ahead and let you give yourself a quick introduction before we hop into lightning round.
Thanks, Alfred. Hi, everyone. I'm Taylor Brown. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm a senior business consultant at EY, and I work in our finance transformation function. As far as with me, I kind of got acquainted with Lyme through their recruiting process. So I have an autoimmune disease, and I'm really passionate about disability advocacy. So when I joined EY and heard about Lyme, I knew it was something I needed to be a part of. In addition to working with Lyme through our Accessibility Professional Network, I'm also a member of our Black Professional Network and our Professional Women's Network as well, and also lead our volunteer work in our Bay Area as a supporting next generation lead at EY. And so I'm happy to talk with you all and talk with Alfred today.
Great. So before we hop in, we do have a couple of lightning round questions. I think this is always good to kind of like get to know one another. So Taylor, first lightning round question is, what is your favorite activity to do on the weekend? I know we just came off of one. Anything fun that you want to be able to call out?
Yes, I've actually been taking swimming lessons. I take them every Saturday. And so it's been pretty cool to kind of like learn those, like the different techniques and the different like swimming things. And especially good for me because like it's very easy on my joints and it's a good way for me to still be active.
That's a good one. I actually, not to feed into a stereotype, I don't know how to swim. There's a stereotype that people don't know how to swim. And I've actually been thinking about swimming lessons. So I might have to chat with you about that offline, but it's great that it's helpful for you. What is the last thing you've binged streaming wise, whether that be Netflix, Apple TV? What's the last thing that you've been streaming wise?
So I just binged Netflix Perfect Match. It's like a dating competition. It's super trashy, but like it's a good way just to turn off my mind and watch some good bad TV.
Good. I haven't seen that one. I've actually been binging The Last of Us.
Ooh.
That one.
Yeah.
Really good show. Definitely a little intense, but I think it's a pretty solid show. What's your favorite artist, or what's a song that you have on repeat on your playlist?
So people probably don't really recognize this about me, but I'm a metalhead. So I love Black Sabbath. So I listen to Iron Man, Paranoid, like anything that's metal is with me.
Oh, that's cool. That's interesting. I might have to get some recommendations from you. I'm more of a Afrobeat, neo soul kind of a guy. So good to hear that from you. Okay, so I think we have a good grounding. We know Taylor's a metalhead. We know that you've been swimming. I think we have a good foundation to go ahead and hop into our conversation. And so I know at the top you kind of mentioned around having an autoimmune disease. Do you mind sharing a little bit more about that journey and how it has impacted you or empowered you both personally and professionally?
Yeah, so a little bit about just the journey of how I got with my disability. So I was diagnosed pretty young. I was about 9 years old. And, when I was talking to you before, like I like to say like I was pretty privileged because my mom was a nurse practitioner. She's been a nurse practitioner for 40 years. And having her in my corner really helped me throughout the process to advocate for myself. Because when I was first having all these symptoms, a lot of the doctors thought, oh, it's just in her head. Oh, it might be an eating disorder or something else. And I had to say like, hey, no, I love food. It's just giving me extreme pain to actually eat. And, the process, it took a long time, a lot of testing, a lot of worrying of like what's going on with me and not really knowing what's happening with my body. And around right before I turned 10, I got this diagnosis of Crohn's disease, had no idea what it was, had no idea what an inflammatory bowel disease was, but hearing that there's this incurable disease that it's going to be with you for the rest of your life. It was pretty scary, but, being able to have my mom in my corner to advocate for me definitely was, not the norm, of course, because not everyone has a healthcare professional in their life. But I, going through that process, it really opened my eyes to, hey, you have to have someone in your corner who can help you advocate through that process.
Yeah, no, I definitely would count you fortunate, blessed, whatever word you want to use, to be able to have someone in your corner like your mom. And so you talked about this and you definitely are sharing about how your mom has been your biggest advocate. And of course, like you and I and folks on the call know, when it comes to Black people in healthcare, there's a lot of mistrust. So I think, what were some tips like during that diagnosis process that came up, in terms of you all, being a Black family, maybe some things that you wanted to get a second opinion about that you sought out, anything like that in your diagnosis journey?
Yeah, so I would say one, getting a second opinion was super helpful for me, just to see that someone else could validate what my first doctor was saying, as well as one, having Black medical professionals in the room. So I was lucky with my mom. She knew different GI nurses. She knew different like a gastroenterologist that she had worked with before. But even if you don't have that, there are some cool networks like you can look through, like ZocDoc, or even Googling just to see. Even now I look at Black doctor or Black OBGYN, because I know that that's a person that I want on my team who can kind of understand that the Black experience and has that kind of camaraderie when I'm going into the room as well. But also, don't be afraid to, request if you feel like there's something wrong and you want a specific test or something, request it and make sure you tell them, hey, I want this test done. And if you're not getting it done, I want that documented into my file, because they will have to legally document that they're refusing a test. And usually that kind of threat, or just that something that happens like that, they're usually going to give you that test because they want to make sure that they're covering their bases.
I think that's a really important point, like around self-advocacy. It's something that I didn't know, as far as like, if I ask for a test and their recommendation is to not go with that test, that it should be documented that they're refusing to take it. And I think that changes a lot of different medical providers' thoughts around like your concerns, because I think that's me. I just learned. So thank you, Taylor. Because when it comes to self-advocacy, especially in the healthcare field, a lot of times, Black patients are, we're kind of like on the receptive side instead of taking a more, kind of like a direct approach with our health, because it's already something that's pretty scary, has a pretty scary history for, a lot of our colleagues. So I definitely think that is something that, I would encourage folks online, if you're taking notes, to definitely like take note of and lean in on. Because I think that definitely plays a really big role. And I guess when you talk about self-advocacy, your mom, gave you those tools. As you've, gotten older, how have you seen those different points of advocacy come up, as far as like, advocating for yourself in like the workplace?
Yeah, so I would say, like, especially when I was going through college and then, starting full time, a lot of things was just like requesting accommodation. So when I first started college, the first thing I did was going down to our disability office and saying, hey, my name is Taylor, I have Crohn's disease, and here are the accommodations that I need. And I had my doctor's note and everything, but some of the accommodations I had were, I have a disease that's colloquially known as the bathroom disease. So I needed to get up throughout a test or throughout a class and be able to go to the bathroom whenever I want. And so sometimes I kind of felt the shame of like, hey, I need this accommodation, but realizing that accommodation is just helping me live my life more to the fullest. And then, going towards, my like full-time job, like I started right in the pandemic and I was taking my CPA exam, and I am immunocompromised because of the medications I was on, and having to ask for, hey, let's make sure that this is COVID safe, because I don't want to get COVID while I'm taking one of the biggest exams of my life. Yeah. And so just understanding that these accommodations are there to help you. It doesn't mean that you're less than, it doesn't mean that you're, having a leg up. It's just for you to live your life to the fullest. And that's something I always keep in my mind when I'm asking for accommodations or I'm talking about my disability. It's a part of me. It's not a negative, it's not a positive, but it's something that makes me who I am.
Yeah. I think, I think that's a really strong point, because again, you kind of like, you learn these tools, from young, and you're able to implement them. And I think, going through even my own, process of, seeking medical accommodation by the form of medical leave, was something that, I said I needed time. I had great managers who were like, let's go ahead and do right by you, and let's get you signed up for a medical leave. So I ended up getting like 2.5 months of paid medical leave while I was able to sort things out when it came to my mental health awakening. And then just to circle back to what you're saying, as far as like, Black healthcare practitioners, the healthcare system of Black people in general is one situation. But when you talk about mental health in the Black community, that's something that, there's even more stigma around. And so just to like, double click on what you were saying, I thought it was extremely important to be able to have, a Black psychotherapist to be able to give me an evaluation, because not only would they kind of like already have a cultural background of where I'm coming from, they will be able to kind of really be able to kind of talk to me from my perspective of experience that, I won't say that, a non-Black provider couldn't provide, but for me as the patient, it was comforting for me to know that I had that ground foundation, that I didn't have to like teach or build or, be able to educate. The doctor was already self-informed. So I think that's really important. So, I think when it comes to like, talking about your disability, I think there's different plays around intersectionality, right? So I see this as as a Black queer man who has like a mental health history, to be able to say, hey, when I talk to people about it, I usually put it in my catch-ups. But essentially you're coming out every time, and having to share this kind of like intimate part of yourself. Can you talk about that constant state of coming out for you, in your adult life, either professionally or personally? And then, to the allies on the call, can you also share, what conditions need to be present for you to feel comfortable, disclosing your disability?
Yeah, so I would say like,
Other identity as well.
so I would say like for me, my disability is a part of me. And so that's something I never want to hide who I am at any point in stage. So when it comes up, I'm quick to say, hey, I have a disability. I have Crohn's disease. It's an autoimmune disease, and taking that time to educate. And I know I've been lucky, just when I'm in the room and I talk about my disability, people want to learn more and have these questions about how has it impacted you? How, like, what is it? They usually don't know what Crohn's disease is. And so I would say, just for any ally out there, just having a safe space for people to talk to, and, let them come to you and talk about their disability. I understand that you might be curious, you might have questions, and that's perfectly okay. But some people are more open than others, and you just have to respect that space. And, kind of like echoing what you talked about, it coming out, like sometimes, like when you see me, you see a Black woman, but you may not see a person with a disability. And so it's just recognizing that ability is temporary. You never know who can have a disability, who doesn't. And so making sure that you just have that in the back of your mind, that, their disability looks different on everybody. And, just making sure that you're making a space where anyone and everyone can be welcome to share their experiences. Yeah.
I think that's important. I feel like, what you're saying, like people having listening ear is good, but then also like you showing up, authentically, right? Making sure that you're showing up with your full identity. Like I can't leave any parts of me at the door. And, at Goldman Sachs, I'm sure it's EY, like you want to be able to bring your genuine self to work, right? You don't want to have to be able to cover. So I'm glad that you kind of are always like forthcoming in that stance. I guess, when switching over to taking it a little more closely to the workplace, I think that coming out process, it can begin at different points based off of people's comfortability. I want to talk to you, Taylor, specifically about the recruiting process. So going from college, applying, interning, what was that process like for you? And, I know a lot of people sometimes get a little bit fearful about disclosing. What was that experience like for you? I know you shared a little bit about it overall, but like specifically for your recruiting process into your full-time role.
Yeah, so I would say like my EY recruiting story was a little bit different. So I had actually, because of my disability, I had taken time off of school and had actually gone back home into LA and started in community college. And if you know about community college, the Big Four wasn't traditionally recruiting from there. And so somehow I had an accounting teacher who was like, hey, Taylor, here's a recruiter at EY. They want to start looking at, folks from historically excluded backgrounds and just different educational backgrounds. And because I was at a community college, it was kind of interesting because they weren't traditionally recruiting from there. And so I met with this recruiter, and they were looking for an intern for their launch internship. And their launch internship is for historically excluded minorities, people with disabilities, and people who identify as LGBTQ plus. And so just having that ability to have that internship and to talk to a company that was, you know, making sure that they were looking for diverse candidates was important to me, because I didn't want to work for a company that didn't care about the things I didn't care about. And so for me, like, as I was saying before, I like to show up as my true authentic self. So some of the first things I said was like, hey, I'm not only I'm a Black woman, but I do have a disability. Like, what are you guys doing at EY for, you know, disability recruiting?
And to clarify, this is like before you applied, like
this before I applied. So I sent a whole email, and because I really want to make sure that wherever I'm working, wherever I'm putting my energy, is reflecting the values that I have. And so I've been talking to the recruiters, and they're explaining to me about all the different things that UI does, and then going through the recruiting process. You, like the traditional recruiting process, you send in an application, and I make sure that I personally always check the do have a disability box when it comes in the application, because again, like, I don't want to work for someone who doesn't care about disability or diverse recruiting. And so I know for some people that could be scary as well, but I just encourage you to think, you want to make sure that you're working for a company who values you as a whole person and not just a part of you. And so I was lucky to get my internship. Everything was fine. You know, I, as a person with autoimmune disease, I have to get doctor's appointments every 6 weeks. And I was pretty upfront about, hey, I'm going to have to take time off because of these doctor's appointments and because of my treatment. And they were really forthcoming. They taught me how to, you know, what I needed to do to take the time off and make sure that everything was good, and just had an open communication. So EY was really good on that.
I'm curious, Taylor, how was it received? Was it kind of like, oh, like, what do you think that there was any hesitance? Do you think that, like, you just highlighted to the recruiter and they shared it? Like, what was that like when you shared, like, hey, I have to take time every 6 weeks for my health due to my disability?
Yeah, so I would say, like, I first had a conversation, and this happened with my full-time as well. I first had a conversation with my counselor of how to approach that situation, because the way, you know, EY consulting works, we have short-term projects, so you might have a different team every single time. And so she encouraged me to set that groundwork in the beginning of, you know, when you first meet the team, like saying, hey, like, I have this disability, I have, you know, to go every 6 weeks for my treatment. And just having that open communication early and often. And so I would say, like, I encourage people to do the same.
Definitely.
And it may feel scary to have that conversation, but again, just knowing that, one, you are protected by the ADA, and that's something I also had in my mind of, I have to have these treatments, and I know that legally they have to require me to get my treatment. They can't say no, but, you know, saying it in a nicer way, but, you know, knowing that you have the law on the side, and just having that communication open and often.
That's good. Early and often. I like those two sound bites. Definitely very important. I think, you know, from the recruiting side, as a recruiter, you know, we, you know, encourage folks to be able to let us know what accommodations you need in the interview process, right? And those kind of accommodations trickle throughout that recruiting process. But, you know, and this is something that Lyme, you know, shares all the time with, you know, their students and professionals. We all need different things that allow us to be able to work in our optimal and most efficient way. And it should be a universal question, honestly. You know, what do you need to be the best at your job? But if you're a person who has, you know, a disability or a condition that needs to be, that will kind of like, whether or not it impacts your ability to do the work is not a question. It's more so around, hey, I need this accommodation, and I need to let you be aware of this, just so that we have an understanding when certain things may come up, right? So, you know, it's not always, I don't think it doesn't necessarily always have to be something that, like, hey, you might have to be out, but it's sometimes always great to be able to give folks a heads up, just to let them know, like, hey, this is something that I live with. You know, if I am someone who may be hearing impaired, like, you know, I prefer, you know, if you would, you know, come and talk to me directly. I don't get my name. There are so many things that you can learn about your colleagues and learn about yourself just by letting people know what you need, so that they're aware. So, you know, I love that, Taylor. Communicate early and often would definitely be some takeaways that I would definitely, you know, add in that. And so, you know, let's let's switch the conversation a bit, because I feel like, we're talking about, putting accommodations down on paper, going through the recruiting process and being open and honest, which I think is a positive. And if you're applying to an employer who values their people, like, and they make that known, Taylor, like through the different programs that they have, like that is something that, should be something that they welcome. But, thinking about ourselves, like, we've been talking a lot about, the perspective of being a professional with a disability, but kind of like leaning into the idea of being a professional of diverse background and difference, right? There is this idea of covering. And covering is this concept where you try to minimize the things that make you feel different in order to kind of like blend in. So, for instance, as someone who is queer, someone asked me what I did for the weekend. I was like, oh, I, went out with friends. I'm not going to say I had a date with this same gender loving, gentleman or queer person, because I want you covered, right? So, Taylor, for you, do you feel like you adjust your style or behavior in the office because you identify as someone who is Black or disabled, or any of your other intersecting identities?
So I would say that I don't like to cover, because again, I like to come as my full authentic self, and I don't want to be somewhere where I can't have to put on this facade. And I know, like, when I was in college, or when I was like interning, I had this idea that I had to be this professional, I had to be, this corporate person, and that was never me. Like, I like my big hair, I like my lots of colors, and I thought I had to minimize myself, and I tried, covering myself and kind of conforming to what I thought was a corporate person, and I lasted maybe like a day, and it made me realize, I was like, I can't do this, and I don't want to be in an environment that will require me to do that as well. And I understand that for some people, covering is for their survival and for their ability to maneuver throughout these places, but I want to make sure that I'm creating a space where everyone can be welcome. And so by making sure that I'm my true authentic self, I hope that I can let other people be their true authentic self as well. So I try my hardest never to coach us and just be 100% Taylor Brown.
100% Taylor Brown. That's another note. I would say, I had a different experience. I think that, I'm from Flint, Michigan originally, Black town. I went to Howard University, a Black school. And so, going to work at a huge bank like Goldman Sachs, like right out of college, I do think that there were some moments where I covered, right? Like, I'm from Michigan, and people always ask me, they see me in like traditional clothes. They say like, oh, where are you from? I'm like, I'm from Michigan. I just have done, African dance since like high school, and I, took Yoruba classes in college. I've been to the continent a number of times. And so I actually really love to wear traditional, West African prints and clothes. But it wasn't like that when I first started at work, very, Brooks Brothers, suit and tie. And I felt that, I wasn't being authentic to myself. Like, we'll have instances where like, oh, like, we're all going to go see, Black Panther. And I would have these moments where, of course, the Black people on the call, probably remember this. When Black Panther first came out, like, if you weren't showing up to the movies ready, dressed in any kind of like print or, outfit, that was like a thing. So of course I wanted to be able to show up to the screening. But I remember I had this moment where I was like, I didn't know if I could wear the pants that I wanted to wear at work. I thought I was consumed with thinking about how others would see me, right? And if they thought negatively about it or not, just because it was something different. I think that, that kind of like moment where I'm like changing in the bathroom because I want to be able to be my full self at this screening, but I can't be my full self in the office. No one imposed that upon me. It was just, my thought process around I need to cover to fit in. And, you know, I definitely think that, you know, everybody has their time to be comfortable. And it wasn't until I had my mental health awakening where I truly, truly said that I cannot not be myself. And if I can't do that where I work, then it's not the place for me. And so I challenged myself, you know. Of course, I also transitioned into a DEI team, which I think was like, you know, hey, I'm an African print, I work in DEI, like, it just should be a no-brainer. But, you know, when I've worn clothes, like maybe like a shirt or pants or even a full suit, you know, I get colleagues, you know, who are from the continent that say, wow, like, where'd you get that? Like, you know, oh, are you Nigerian? And then the next time I see them, they have a printed shirt on, right? And so, you know, our theme for Black History Month at the firm is history makers. And we just need to know that sometimes we need to challenge a status quo, especially if it's not self-imposed, like if it's not like, you know, imposed like from a firm-wide structure, like we can push the needle. And so I've done that and I feel comfortable, you know, in the way that I show up. But everyone doesn't get to have that same kind of feeling. And I think, you know, covering or not, I still think, you know, Black professionals can still have that sense of, you know, imposter syndrome, right? And so, Taylor, want to get your thoughts on that. Like, you know, I know, and we didn't share this, but like, how long have you been with EY?
So I've been with EY for coming up a little bit over 2 years now.
Okay. So young professional, I would say in that space, you know, have you ever had any moments of imposter syndrome? I would love to kind of like unhash that with you.
Oh, every single day. Sometimes I'm like on a call, I'm like, do I even know what I'm talking about? Mm-hmm. And I feel like sometimes with imposter syndrome, it's like what you were saying, we almost impose it to ourselves. Mm. And I remember like I had huge anxiety when I first started just even interning until full-time, because I was like, am I supposed to be here? Am I smart enough? Am I good enough to be at this firm? And I remember sitting in therapy, vocalizing all these thoughts, and my therapist just turned to me and was saying, they wouldn't have wanted you. They wouldn't want you here if they wouldn't have picked you. So why do you have these thoughts of not being good enough when you're already in the room, when you're already showing up? And sometimes you just got to remind yourself about who you are, and remind yourself that you're that girl, that you're that person. And if they didn't want you, they wouldn't have picked you. And it's just something you kind of have to reiterate to yourself. And it's still something I do every single day when I'm having these thoughts of, am I good enough? But I have to remember that they gave me this computer, they gave me these engagements, and they wouldn't have done so if they didn't think that Taylor Brown was the right person.
Yeah. I often, that's important. I'm one, double click on the fact that you had a therapist to talk this through. As much as we need dentists and like an optometrist, like Black people, we need therapists. And so I'm in the market for one. So again, we might have to touch base offline. But, you know, I'm glad you had a therapist to kind of like talk you through these things. And I think that we get in our heads a lot. I share this really quick story around, you know, I was like a you know, first year analyst at Goldman, and we had a new global head of operations, and this new global head just happened to be, they had to put on a meeting where he was going to come down and meet all the different teams. And so my team selected me to be the spokesperson and to tell the global head about our team and what we did. And of course, like, you know, I'm nervous. Imposter syndrome in full blown. You know, I script down all these things. I write down stats and data, and I present it to like my managers. Like, hey, this is how I want to be able to approach this. This is how I want to cover it. And you know, I you know, present it, and they're just looking at me and they're like, you know, Alfred, they said, you know, toss the paper. You know what we do. We chose you because we know that you will be able to talk to the functions that the team does and do it in a personal way. And we chose you to do it for that very reason. We don't want you to sound like, quote unquote, what you think you should sound like. We want you for you. And so just, you know, to that point around, like, they chose you for the job. They chose me for that assignment. And I think that was like a moment where I had to, you know, the imposter syndrome was like melted off of my shoulders because like, no, they want me for me. And that's very important. So to anyone on the call struggling with imposter syndrome, no, you're not alone. Taylor and I feel it every day. But you wouldn't be in the seat that you're in if you weren't selected. You know, there's tons of smart people that work at our different firms, and you're one of them. So I think, you know, I just want to be able to empower the audience with that. And so like Taylor, you know, I think, you know, you being your authentic self, it opens the door to allow people to be their authentic selves as well. So I guess, how would you feel, how do you suppose, like for us on the call, as, you know, as partners, maybe even as allies, how do we create that environment to make people safe? Like, you know, and what factors kind of need to be in play in order to create a safe place, not only for like a one-on-one relationship and maybe like a team or a company culture?
Yeah, so I would say like the first step is showing, as for the partners, is showing up as your authentic self as well. Because when I see that you're showing up 100%, then that makes me feel like I can show up as 100%. And also, like sometimes when I'm talking to, you know, junior staff or just interns, the first thing I will say is quite literally, this is a safe space. I'm going to be 100%, and I would love for you to be 100% as well. And so sometimes even just saying the words of like, I want you to show up as your 100% self. I know, I like to hear that you care about me being authentic as well. And again, like as partners or as allies, you just want to make sure that you're reaffirming your people and making sure that they feel that they're being safe. And if there's any type of backlash or anything like that, like you shut it down immediately. Because when I feel that you support me and you care about me and you're making sure that I can be my 100% self, then that makes me feel like I can do the same for others as well.
Yeah, I agree with that. I would definitely say, you know, for professionals who have disabilities, like, you know, I've in my like one-on-one catch-ups, like I talk about my career journey and I mentioned my mental health awakening. I've seen people in tears, right? Because I was willing to be able to share, you know, and they said like, wow, like I have those same feelings. I've had a similar experience. You know, you're so brave. And for me, it's just a part of my story. But that is a good first step into be able to create a safe environment and also be able to signpost, hey, this is a safe space. Because I work in HR, I have to tell people that a lot, like, hey, it's okay. You know, this is a safe space. And so, yeah, I think, you know, when you have those kinds of environments, you know, there's a lot of trust. So I think another piece of what you're saying is also like making sure that, you know, you hold that trust. If people tell you things in confidence, as long as it's not, you know, something that, you know, you might need to alert someone of, be able to hold that safe space for them and hold what they're sharing in confidence. And I also think, you know, when you're creating a safe space, just to add on to what you were already sharing, Taylor, is that you don't have to have the answers, right? Am I right?
Correct.
It's also important just to be able to be a listening ear and hold space and time for people to be able to process what they're saying. I think a lot of our companies, we want to be able to just, hey, this is what you do. This is how you get it done. But I think relationships the space is more valuable than the transaction of you just giving me a tip that you think might work. And so Taylor, just to deviate a little bit from the question, who has created those spaces for you at EY, and like, how did that like relationship come about?
So I did say it's definitely our professional network. So at EY, we have professional networks for different affinities. So for me, I'm a part of our Black professional network, our accessibility network, and our professional women's network. And I got acquainted with them through my first internship, which was for historically excluded minorities. And just knowing that a company had these types of professional groups was just calming to me, because knowing that they are creating a space for people just to gather around different affinity groups was important to me. And then just talking to people and just, you know, it's so good just to see people who are like you, who have a similar background, because there's that type of camaraderie that you get that you may not necessarily see or think you can see in the normal workplace. And so I've gotten so many different friends from there, and just been able to, again, just like talk to people who have been there, who have done that, but who also look like me as well. And so I think it's important just to, you kind of got to find where you're at. And I think, especially for a big firm at EY or Goldman Sachs or anything, like you just have to know there's always a space for you. It's just a point of finding it there.
Nice. And so you talk about finding support in your inclusion networks. Which one are you a part of? Like all of them? Are you a part of like the disability network, the Black network? Like how have you found those different realms of community?
So I would say like with EY, they kind of made it known, like here's all the different things you can join. So when I first started, I kind of just went through and looked at what we had to offer, and I joined everything because I was like, who knows where it could happen. And then most of these events, they have free food, free drinks. And I was like, I'm definitely there.
Yes, my favorite food is free. My favorite drink is also free. So I'm with you.
And then just going there and like putting yourself out there and networking and just meeting people and kind of keeping up with those relationships as well. And so I would say it's not something that happens overnight. Like, you do have to put yourself out there, but sometimes it's just even asking like, hey, do we have an actual resource at our firm or at our company? And even like, for example, like for our accessibilities network, we had a national accessibilities network, but we didn't necessarily have one in Bay Area. And I remember asking like, hey, like, why don't we have one of these? Because we have a neurodiversity center of excellence, like what can happen? And I asked my Black professional network, and they connected me to different people so I could like see if I wanted to start something like that. And sometimes it's just like putting yourself out there and asking the question of, is this there? Because even if it isn't, I guarantee you someone else has had that question and they want to make something happen.
Yeah, no, that's good. And I was the same as you. I joined all of the inclusion networks. And I think it's important for folks to know, like, even if you're an ally on the call, like you can join the disability or ability networks at your companies to be able to like learn more, to meet people, build relationships. I would say, for me, I think the first place I found home was the Black network at Goldman Sachs, definitely, from my internship to, starting full time, like you said, you don't always have to, you could be your authentic self in a different way. I think being authentic at work on team and you have deliverables is one thing, but then be able to talk to someone who, went to, who's from the Bay Area, who went to an HBCU, like in my case, you have those different realms of connectivity that run pretty deep. And I say this often, like Black people love to connect. Like it's a part of our like culture. Like we love community and building it. So I find that, the Black network has been a cornerstone for me as well. And then actually joining the disability network as the advisor, I would say my best experiences, some of the best genuine people that you meet. And it's funny because as I've joined, I've seen it diversify, right? A lot more, just as far as like, people from different backgrounds and being able to join in. And it's funny because disability is literally like the most diverse group. Like every walk of life, anyone can have like a visible and invisible disability. So I think it's always important to be able to build that piece up as well. Even if, like you say, like, hey, I really identify the Black network. If you're someone who's on this call, who is an advocate, of the professionals with disabilities, also figure out what's going on in the disability or ability network range as well. And so, Taylor, that leads me to my last question before we go into Q&A, which is kind of like, talking about disability within the Black community. Personally, and also professionally, like, do you find that it's easy? Do you find that you've found people who share that intersection? And just tell me about that experience.
Yeah, so I would say like disability is something that's still kind of a stigma that I see in the Black community. And it's something that we don't really talk about because I think, especially when you have an invisible disability, it's sometimes hard to initiate that conversation because at first look, we may not look that we have a disability. We may not look like there's something wrong with us. And there's also this trope of like having to be like the strong Black woman, and, you know, sharing a disability, that makes me vulnerable. That makes me not the, you know, it shatters people's perception of what a Black person looks like. And I would say it's something that I still am struggling with. It's like, how can we have these conversations? How can we be, you know, talk about these things, because it does affect our community. It does have a real life effect on us, and it's something that we need to talk about. And, you know, I'm happy to, like, I just learned a couple of weeks ago, like Lyme, they have their own Black disability group. And that's amazing, because I feel like we do need these spaces for, you know, Black disabled folks to talk about us, to talk with, and also for allies to learn, like, hey, there are people who are Black who have a disability. And then just in terms of like, in my personal life, like through EY, I met other folks who are Black, who identify as Black and disabled as well, not necessarily through anything else, of just like saying, hey, I'm Black and disabled, I care about these things, and learning about from them. And it's something I'm helping, and I want to work more on, of like creating that space for, you know, that intersection to happen. But, you know, I think it's something that we do need to talk about it as a community.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I found the same. You know, I feel like in the Black community, we have so many things that are going on in our world. And so when you talk about, like, you know, individual situations that make us different, whether that be queer, whether that be having disability, it's just not something that kind of like naturally comes up. But it's something that I have, you know, focused on kind of like pushing the direction of. So I sit on a board for this foundation called the Jalen D. Berry Foundation, which is a community foundation in Connecticut that connects like Black and brown youth with different opportunities in like finance. But I said, like, hey, look, as a board, like, you know, how are we tracking when it comes to engaging students with disabilities? Like, you know, we should have something like an event dedicated for folks to be able to come in and have a conversation and know that they feel welcome. The same in the queer space. So I feel like, you know, I don't know if you saw Gabrielle Union and Dwayne Wade kind of like share different highlights about bringing more conversations into the Black conversation in terms of their childhood. When it comes to like Black trans advocacy. But like, there's a lot of things that we focus on in the Black community. We need to make sure everyone is present. We need to make sure it's an inclusive conversation. There's this Ghanaian proverb that I shared in our Black History Month video for Goldman, and it's called Mujina Bako, Abuso Abako. It means one family, one blood. So no matter how different we are, we all share a core. So to your point, like, you know, we need to do a better job at bringing the conversation in both areas. And even in those disability spaces, like, you know, have we reached out, you know, are we partnering with, you know, Black organizations that focus on mental health? Like, that's my go-to. But like, you know, for you, it's like, you know, how are we connecting the dots with more people? And thank you for the plug. Live Connect does have a Black community group. I've led the conversations last year and will continue leading them in this year. Very good conversations. And it's usually very, we usually come on, we're just usually talking, we talk about things that are going on as far as like pop culture. We talk about different people's, like what they're reading. And it's actually just an overall empowering group. So whether you or not you identify as having disability or not, it's always a really good time to be able to connect with professionals who kind of like see the world in multiple layers like we do. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Renee. Sorry, the time is flying. I didn't even know we were like almost at the end of the hour, but
the conversation's too good.
I know. I wish we could stay on for longer, but you both were wonderful, and there's so much great information that you shared here. And I think a few of the questions you did answer throughout the session, and I'm sure you haven't had a time to read it because you've been absorbed in this conversation, but lots of affirmation too coming in to the hosts and panelists through the chat about what you're saying and how it really resonates with people. So appreciate all of your insights. We have a few minutes for just a couple questions if anybody wants to add them to the chat or to the Q&A, but I'll ask this one. This person asked, how can HR professionals encourage more people managers to be disability informed with their teams? you want to start with that, Alfred?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and hop in there. I think that one, as HR professionals, we need to be able to like bake it into trainings, right? So whether or not that's sharing, you know, like resources such as like the different trainings that Lime provides to managers. I'm even working on something now for our interns to be able to have all the managers of interns with disabilities be able to, you know, go through the webinar training that we offer via Lime, that Lime offers, that Lime offers. But I think it's about like baking it in and making them aware. Also, I think it's a big piece around, you know, having different, if you know your population, being able to kind of provide support. So, you know, there's tons of trainings. I know managers are always busy, but like that is something that's optional on the shelf that they can look at. What we also do, just, you know, in terms of Goldman, is that for all of our, let's say like summer interns who have a disability, we pair them up with mentors in the disability network. So I think it's also going to be about like engaging your inclusion networks for support, and also kind of like being the HR professional that sets up this, you know, one-to-one, you know, mentorship for the summer, or even be able to have, you know, groups come together so that people know that there's community, and that they can be able to share things with the HR professional that needs to be addressed with, like, you know, potentially with like, you know, other parts, like may that be accessibility or even employee relations sometimes. So I think I would say those are the top things that come to mind.
That's great. Thank you, Alfred. And thank you for plugging those trainings too. We're excited to see some Goldman people on that. Taylor, I want to give you an opportunity if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I would say like UI specific. Like I know we have like specific toolkits about working with people with disabilities and different tools and resources at your hand if you're working with a team of with people with disabilities as well. So I would say, like, again, like similar to Alfred, like checking out like different trainings and then just seeing what is out there within your company specific place, and then also going to Lime as well.
Yeah, I would also add, thank you for saying that, Taylor. We've also produced a disability ally guide. So talking about the dimension of difference, the lights went out. We're talking about the dimension of difference in terms of different forms of disability and how you can like advocate for them in like meetings. How do you set up accommodations for the broad organization? How do you enable things simple such as Zoom captioning? So those things you can kind of bake into an ally guide that can be a resource that you can just pull off the shelf for professionals as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And asking those questions and making sure all of those things are in place are such a good place to start. Thank you, Alfred. One person asked, do you have any advice for experienced job applicants? Being able to talk to people directly is much easier, but I find my applications get lost in the ATS to interview process.
Yeah, I'll hop in quickly. I would say make sure you're leveraging like networks. So whether that may be a Lime, if someone identifies as neurodiverse, I'll also plug an organization called Especially Sterna. Disability In, these are all different organizations that have corporate partners who flag different candidates. So whether that's someone that you meet at, you know, recruiting event, even if it's virtual, like a lot of times people don't attend the virtual recruiting events, I would say attend and make sure that recruiters know your name. But also working through a partner of like a disability partner in this space of hiring also helps you kind of like make sure your application gets plucked out of that pool. Because for instance, I know all of the Lime Connect fellows who apply to the firm, and I pull their application. But if someone were to apply outside of that, and they're going through the regular recruiting process, works, and sometimes there's different clogs in any company. But when you're able to flag that to the HR professional or the DEI person who covers disability, or be able to go through an organization, that should be able to, you should be able to garner more support that way, as far as like getting your application pulled up and looked at.
Mm-hmm. Taylor, did you have a comment?
I would gonna say, like, seeing if you can find any type of networking events, because that's a good way to get your face in front of a person who can get your resume where it needs to go. And then as far as just like, you know, if you're thinking about like just cold applying to different things, like I would say go on LinkedIn and try to find, you know, different professionals within the group that you want to apply to, so you can like have coffee chats. And, you know for me, like, I'm pretty receptive. If you reach out to me on LinkedIn, I'm quick to hop on a call and be like, hey, we can have like a 15-minute chat about what the recruiting process is, and let me see if I can get you to the right place as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Taylor. So I'm going to wrap up with this question. And someone asked about the community groups. So I know Alfred's planning something for the next few weeks. And when we share out the recording, we'll also share information about joining that community group. So we'd love to see many of you join us. When we talk about disability at Lyme Connect, we talk about the strengths that really come from living with a disability. So would love for each of you to touch on that, both from a perspective of the strengths you've developed and how you communicate that, and your value to an organization, and from people joining, seeing the strengths that people with disabilities bring to creating a more diverse workforce. So give you the last minute to just share your thoughts on that. Taylor, do you want to go first?
Yeah, for sure. I think, for me, having a disability, it's given me a different viewpoint, and it gives me a sense of empathy that, I may not have had of not having this disability. And also just being able to kind of see the world in a different way has been very valuable to me. And I think also just in terms of like a skill set, it's given me the ability to be very, very organized and very just on the point, because, I never know when I'll feel good or when I'll feel bad. So I'm very much the person who's like, let me get this done, and like, have that good organization skills as well.
I would say a superpower that has come from my mental health experience is again that power of empathy, seeing through the hey, how are you doing? I'm fine, and actually giving people the space to kind of like talk about what's going on with them, and not to give any recommendations, but just for that they have someone that they can listen to, because that's sometimes isolating the experience. I would say other superpowers that I have grown with that experience is self-care. I had a 30-minute massage this weekend, and like literally I'm sitting there getting a massage and I'm getting like ideas and thoughts around things I could do at work, like different solutions that I was thinking about. So self-care, it's been a superpower that I would implore everyone to like take advantage of, because sometimes you're so stressed about something, your body is stressed as well. So being able to like have those moments of like reset does a lot for your mental health. So I would just advocate and share those superpowers. My superpower is getting massages.
I love that. I think we could all benefit from that. So thank you, Alfred, for ending us with on that note. And thank you for moderating this discussion. Taylor, it was such a pleasure having you join us today. And thank you to our audience for joining us and for all these great questions. I know everybody benefited from it, from everything you shared today. So thank you again. And we will share the recording. I see lots of questions about that. But until then, have a great day, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Renee. Thanks for chatting with me, Taylor. Have a good one.